The courtroom held its breath. The boy, thin and trembling, suddenly rose from his seat. His voice cracked, but rang loud. "That's her! That's my mother!" He was pointing, his arm outstretched, his eyes wide, fixed on the defense attorney standing just feet away. The woman froze, lips parting, a paper slipping from her hand. Judges blinked. A bailiff stepped forward. The gallery stirred like a tide about to crash. And then a gasp swept through the room like a shiver down a nation's spine. Before we dive in, if this story moves you, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell to keep the stories coming your way. Just a heads up, we don't just share stories here. We invite you to experience them. There's a little quiz at the end, just for fun. It's our way of saying thanks for watching closely and spotting the subtle moments others might miss. We might even pin the best answer. The courtroom was like every other in the county, wood-paneled, stoic, and cold, with fluorescent light. A dusty clock ticked above the judge's bench, marking time not with seconds, but with destinies. That morning, it was packed tighter than usual. An unusual case had drawn attention. A 15-year-old foster boy, Malik, accused of stealing from the very shelter that housed him. He sat beside his public-appointed defense attorney, head bowed, sneakers worn thin. His brown eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's. Life had tossed him between homes, never giving him a place to land, let alone roots. The attorney? Her name was Natalie Cross, a sharp, respected woman in her mid-40s with a reputation for precision and poise. Her black suit was immaculate, voice even. She had no children, as far as anyone knew. No family in town, just her work and a private life she rarely discussed. As the hearing opened, the prosecutor began painting Malik as a troubled youth, a repeat offender, untrustworthy. But then something odd happened. When Natalie began her cross-examination of a shelter worker, Malik stared at her, not with fear, but familiarity. His posture changed. He sat up straighter. His lip trembled, but not with fear, with realization. The judge called for a brief recess. That's when Malik stood, pointed, and shouted those 4 life-shattering words. "You're my mother!" Gasps erupted. The courtroom became a pressure cooker of whispers and stares. Natalie's hand gripped the bench, knuckles whitening. The judge called for order. But Natalie didn't speak. Not at first. When she did, her voice was barely audible. "Your Honor," she said, almost in a whisper, "I request a recess. I need to speak with the defendant, alone." The judge, an aging man named Holloway, with a soft jaw and hard eyes, studied her through thick lenses. Silence settled again. Then he nodded once. 10 minutes, he said. "Bailiff, escort Ms. Cross and the defendant to consultation room C. No one else." Malik stood slowly, uncertain. Natalie didn't look at him. She moved stiffly, like a puppet whose strings were suddenly tangled. The courtroom watched them go, as though they were walking into a storm. Consultation room C was colder than the courtroom. No windows, just gray walls and a single table under buzzing fluorescent light. Natalie sat across from him, hands folded. Malik didn't sit. "You knew," he said. "Didn't you?" She didn't answer. "I saw your face just now. You knew who I was." Natalie looked up at him, the polished veneer of the high-powered attorney stripped away. In its place was something raw, frightened, perhaps, or ashamed. "I didn't," she said quietly. "I didn't know, not for certain." "But you suspected," Malik whispered. She exhaled, slow and shaky. "There was a boy, years ago. They told me he died during childbirth, that He never even took a breath. Malik's hands curled into fists. They lied. I see that now. She closed her eyes, as if trying to trap time. I was 17, no support. My parents, church people, strict and proud, sent me away to a private maternity ward for the fallen. They said it was for the best, that the baby would be taken care of. Natalie opened her eyes again. I never saw you. They told me not to ask questions. I tried to come back for you 2 months later. Wanted to know where you were buried, but they said there was no record. I thought it was over. I buried it. Malik stared at her. But you became a lawyer. Yes. Why? She hesitated. Because I wanted to make things right for people who don't get second chances. People like you. The door clicked once. The bailiff's shadow loomed. Time's up! They didn't speak as they were led back into the courtroom, but Malik kept glancing at her. His expression no longer carried just accusation, it carried something heavier. Hope, maybe, or a lifetime of questions just beginning to find their shape. Back in court, whispers buzzed through the gallery like insects in a jar. Judge Holloway raised a brow as they returned. Proceed, counselor. Natalie stood, but didn't resume her place behind the defense table. She moved forward, her voice steadier than before, though something had changed in her demeanor, her tone, her posture, even her eyes. The calm confidence was still there, but it had been replaced with something older, wiser, more human. Your Honor, I request a change in counsel, she said. The courtroom gasped again. The prosecutor's eyebrows lifted in disbelief. Excuse me, the judge said. I believe I'm too emotionally compromised to serve as this young man's attorney. Judge Holloway narrowed his eyes. Because of what he said? Yes. Do you confirm his claim? A long pause. Then, no, I neither confirm nor deny it, but I acknowledge that my ability to represent him objectively has been altered. As the court clerk shuffled for paperwork, the gallery murmured. People leaned to whisper theories. A reporter in the back scribbled furiously. But in the middle of all the chaos, Malik sat still. He watched Natalie, not with anger, but a strange, cautious longing. She didn't look back. That evening, news of the outburst made local headlines. Shocking twist in youth trial. Lawyer accused of being defendant's birth mother. Secrets in the courtroom. Who is Malik's real mother? Legal ethics and lost bloodlines. The Natalie Cross dilemma. Natalie locked her phone and placed it face down. She sat in her apartment, the skyline beyond her window turning to ink. Her cat, Mercy, nuzzled against her leg, sensing the tremor beneath her stillness. She opened a worn box from the closet. Inside were old clippings, newsletters from her law school days, a black and white photo of her as a teen holding her diploma with stiff arms and hollow eyes. Beneath it, folded and yellowed with time, was a birth certificate, but it was blank in the child section. She'd kept it all these years, not for hope, but as a reminder of silence. She traced the edges of the paper, her mind replaying Malik's face, the sharp chin, the stubborn brow, the eyes that burned with a fire too familiar. Malik, meanwhile, lay in his cot at the juvenile center, staring at the ceiling. The other boys had asked him what happened, whether it was true. He'd shrugged them off, but inside the questions raged like a storm. Could it really be her? Was it just coincidence? Or had someone finally told the truth? He remembered a staff member once muttering during intake that his file had holes, a missing birth date, no parent ID, Only a location. St. Mary's Home for the Lost, a shuttered institution now, with sealed records and lawsuits in its wake. Was that where she had gone? And if so, why had no one ever come for him? 2 days later, Malik's case was reassigned. The new attorney, Mr. Keene, was younger, more by the book. But he noticed something in Malik, an edge of focus, even fire. Why the sudden interest in the trial? Keene asked. Malik didn't answer. Meanwhile, Natalie dug into something she hadn't dared in years. She drove 3 hours out of the city to the archives of St. Mary's. The grounds were rotting, closed since 2010, after allegations of baby laundering surfaced and staff quietly disappeared. She bribed her way into the administrative basement with a donation and a signed liability waiver. It was there, under dusty ledgers and rusted cabinets, that she found it. A record, infant number 471-D, birth date August 3rd, mother, cross, Natalie J. Disposition, deceased, stillborn. But a faint pencil note followed. Reassigned to placement, per Director A.H. authorization. Natalie felt her stomach knot. Reassigned, not deceased. The document had a scribbled stamp, confidential, do not release. That night, Natalie sat in her car for hours, the file in her lap. She should have gone to the authorities. She should have told Malik. But something held her back. Fear of what it meant, of being wrong, or worse, of being right. A week passed. The trial resumed. Natalie sat in the gallery now, no longer at the table, but her presence loomed like a shadow. Every time Malik looked over, he found her eyes already on him. Witnesses came and went. The shelter staff gave conflicting testimonies. Malik's new attorney argued with growing precision that the accusations lacked hard evidence. But something had changed in Malik. He asked questions. He took notes. He whispered suggestions to his lawyer. He had, for the first time in his life, something to fight for. Then came a turning point. Keene called for a subpoena, requesting full access to Malik's original adoption and custody files. The prosecutor objected. The judge narrowed his eyes. On what grounds? They're sealed, the prosecutor snapped, by court order. Keene paused. Your Honor, we have reason to believe those records were falsified and that a crime may have occurred regarding the placement of this minor. The room exploded again. Reporters practically tripped over themselves to file the story. The judge granted the motion, reluctantly. A new date was set. Outside the courtroom, as the crowd dispersed, Natalie and Malik crossed paths in the hallway. A long, silent corridor. They stopped. Did you find anything? Malik asked. Natalie hesitated. There's a file, a note. It says I gave birth to you and that you died. But I didn't? No, she said, her voice cracking. You didn't. For the first time, her hand reached out. It hovered, unsure, then fell. Malik didn't flinch. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid. He looked away. Then, softly, I think I remember you. She blinked. You were a baby. Number not then. He paused. When I was 5, in the shelter, a woman came during inspections. You looked right at me, then turned away. Natalie's lips parted. She remembered that visit. Just once, as a young legal clerk, she'd been assigned to St. Mary's for a state audit. She remembered a boy, thin, big eyes, staring through her like he knew. She'd felt sick for days after. That was you? She whispered. Malik nodded. A long silence followed. Then the bailiff called out, Defendant, let's go. Malik turned, walking away. But just before he rounded the corner, he paused, looked back. "She said you never came for me," he said quietly. "But maybe you did." And then he disappeared down the hallway. Natalie stood frozen in the sterile hallway long after Malik had gone. His words echoed, not in her ears, but in the hollow places she'd kept sealed for years. Maybe you did. It was the first time anyone had given her the benefit of a doubt. Not as a lawyer, not as an advocate, but as a mother, if that's even what she was. She turned slowly, headed toward the exit, but something new had begun inside her. A question louder than fear. What if he wasn't the only one lied to? 4 days later, sealed files arrive. The court clerk delivered the files in a battered red box, thick with dust and institutional silence. Judge Holloway ordered the courtroom cleared except for the attorneys and essential parties. No media, no gallery, not even Natalie. But she waited outside, pacing the corridor in 5-step bursts, every nerve alive with dread. Inside, Keene opened the file with gloved hands. The room felt so quiet, the flipping of pages sounded like thunderclaps. "Your Honor," he said after 10 minutes of scanning, "I believe what we're holding here supports an allegation of fraud in the ward's record-keeping, possibly human trafficking." The prosecutor's mouth tightened. "This is speculation." Keene didn't flinch. Infant 471-D, Malik, was marked deceased within 48 hours of birth, then reassigned by Director A.H. without parent notification. The paper trail ends there, but hospital logs show the child was treated for mild respiratory issues and discharged 3 days later, alive. And where was he taken? Keene held up a second file. A closed-door transport to St. Mary's Home for the Lost. No documentation of guardianship. No foster record until age 4. That's when he enters the system as a ward of the state, with no parental claims or background. The judge leaned back, face ashen. And the birth mother? Keene paused, crossed Natalie J., but the file shows she was never notified the child survived. The signature under consent for permanent surrender is clearly forged. We'll need a handwriting expert, but the slant and strokes don't match her legal documentation. The judge ran a hand down his jaw. This goes deeper than this case. Outside the courtroom, Natalie stood just feet from the door, having heard none of it. The waiting had become its own punishment. She stared at her reflection in a fire extinguisher's glass casing, seeing someone she no longer recognized. Shoulders hunched, face pale, eyes that had seen both victory and ruin. Malik was somewhere inside that room, hearing the truths about his own life before she was allowed to. Suddenly, the door opened. Keene stepped out. "We need to talk," he said, back at her apartment. Natalie poured tea, but neither of them drank it. Keene laid out photocopies of the sealed documents. "You were lied to, about everything, not just him, about your rights, your consent." She stared at the pages, blinking. "They forged my signature." "Looks that way." She shook her head. "Why?" "Because the maternity ward was part of a network. Women who couldn't pay, who were isolated, pressured into surrendering their kids. If the mother resisted, the paperwork made the decision for them." "And Malik?" "Used to pad the system. Some shelters got higher funding for younger wards. Infants brought bonuses. But if they had no parental trace," he tapped the page, "they were even easier to move around." Natalie pressed her palms to her face. "He lived in that system for 15 years because I wasn't brave enough to push back." "No," Keene said quietly, "because the system knew you wouldn't." At the juvenile center, Malik watched rain draw crooked lines down the window. Outside, the world felt too big. Inside, it felt too late. He hadn't asked to see her again. But a guard appeared at his door that evening. "You got a visitor." He hesitated. "Who?" The man shrugged and didn't give a name. Malik stepped into the visiting room with caution. But it wasn't Natalie. It was a woman in her 60s with a silk scarf, a clipboard, and eyes that didn't flinch. "Hello, Malik," she said. "My name is Dr. Geraldine Pratt. I'm with the State Historical Review Committee. I investigate closed facilities, especially ones like St. Mary's." He stared at her. "Why now?" "Because your case has become very public." She slid a folder across the table. "I thought you might want to see this." Inside were photographs, dozens of them, babies in cribs, staff members, handwritten notes. One showed a teenage girl, maybe 17, holding her stomach, back straight, eyes forced wide for the camera. Malik touched the edge of the photo. "That's her." "Yes," Pratt said. "That's Natalie Cross." He looked up. "What do you want from me?" "I want your help to identify people, faces, places, names. They covered up so much. We need someone who lived it to help piece it back together." Malik stared at the photos. "If I do this, will it change anything?" "It could change everything." He nodded once. Later, that night, Natalie sat alone again, watching the sky flicker with lightning, but no rain. The storm was coming, but hadn't arrived yet. She opened her laptop and began writing an email to her firm. Subject, leave of absence request. She paused midway, erasing the legal justifications. She wrote instead, "I can't serve others until I face what I've ignored. I am no longer asking for time. I'm taking it for someone who might be my son, and for the girl I used to be before the silence began." She hit send. Then she opened her private safe. Inside, beneath old client files, was a single folded paper, a letter she'd written but never mailed, addressed to the child they told me never existed. She began reading it aloud. Flashback, 19 years ago. The air in the maternity ward was stale. The nurses smiled too much. The silence was too clean. Natalie, young and bruised by months of secrecy, asked to see her baby. The nurse shook her head. "You need rest." "Please," she said. "Just once." The nurse whispered something to a man in a suit. Then came the lie. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. The baby didn't make it." Natalie broke. Back to present. Malik sat in his cell, the file of photographs under his mattress. One image had fallen free, the one of Natalie at 17. He stared at it, unable to sleep. He thought about the times he'd been called unwanted, dangerous, hopeless. What if it wasn't him that was broken? What if it was the world that lied? He didn't realize he was crying until the tear hit the edge of the photo. The next morning, a letter arrives. At Natalie's door, a courier dropped an envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed on an old typewriter. "You're not the only one looking. Others are watching now. Dig too deep, and we'll bury more than the truth." There was no signature, just a symbol, a stylized AH inside a triangle. Her hands trembled. She turned on her burner phone and called Keene. "We're not dealing with a broken system," she said. "We're dealing with one that was built to be untraceable." He went silent. Then, "I just got the same note." cut to a dark archive room. A man in a linen suit watched a wall of photographs. He tapped the face of Malik in a recent courtroom sketch. Then, Natalie. He whispered, "Blood always finds blood." Behind him, rows of boxes, each labeled with numbers and initials, waited, unopened, forgotten, until now. The man in the linen suit moved like a curator rather than a conspirator, slow, precise, reverent in a macabre sort of way. His office, buried in the sub-basement of a now defunct government building, didn't appear on any current maps. No signage, no digital footprint. He opened one of the boxes marked 471-D, revealing brittle files, cassette tapes, and old Polaroids secured with a black silk ribbon. He removed a photograph of Natalie as a teenager, the same one Malik had seen. He turned it over. A date, a code, and a name scrawled faintly beneath it. Dr. Alwyn Herrick. A.H. He tucked it into his breast pocket. Meanwhile, at the juvenile center, Malik met with Dr. Geraldine Pratt again, this time under supervision. The warden had grown nervous after the news coverage exploded. Journalists were camped outside the gates. Protesters were holding signs. No more lost children. Tell the truth, set the files free. This isn't going away quietly, Pratt whispered. Malik looked weary. Nothing in my life ever has. She handed him a photo. Do you recognize this man? It was old, blurry. A man in a lab coat standing outside a building labeled Saint, Mary's Institute for Ethical Reform. He stared. I've seen him before. I think he came once when I was really little. Pratt looked alarmed. You're sure? Malik nodded. He gave me a lollipop, but he didn't smile. He just stared at me like I was inventory. She jotted something down furiously in a red notebook. At Natalie's apartment. Keene stood at the window, gripping a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Natalie was hunched over her kitchen table, rereading the anonymous letter again and again. We need protection, she said. For him, for both of us. Keene shook his head. Protection from who? We're dealing with an organization that buried infants alive on paper, that forged signatures, disappeared records, sealed courts. We need to go public. He turned. You're not thinking straight. If you go public, they'll smear you, make you look like a hysterical ex-teen mother who lost her mind. Natalie's voice was ice. I'm not afraid of that anymore. You should be. He tossed something onto the table, a report. Found this last night. In 1994, the year you gave birth, St. Mary's received a $2.6 million research endowment from a private firm tied to biodata analytics. Natalie blinked. What kind of analytics? Behavioral tracking, children raised in extreme conditions to see how trauma affects neurological development. She whispered it before he could. Human experimentation. Later that day, Malik's private court session. The judge, stern and tight-lipped, held the sealed file in one hand and a motion in the other. The state has received compelling evidence suggesting that the minor defendant may have been trafficked under fraudulent legal procedures following birth. If substantiated, it constitutes grounds for expungement of criminal charges pending full investigation. Malik's heart raced. But, Judge Holloway continued, the question remains whether this court has jurisdiction to investigate institutional wrongdoing from 2 decades ago. For that, we must petition a federal inquiry. He banged the gavel once. Petition is granted. Trial is postponed pending review. Gasps filled the room. Keen whispered something to Malik, but Malik was already scanning the gallery. Natalie wasn't there. She was elsewhere, following a lead. An address from the note. Just coordinates, really. It took her to an old hospice facility, long abandoned, with graffiti along the stone walls. As she walked toward the rear, her phone buzzed. A message from a number with no ID. "You're already too close. Leave this alone." She stopped, looked around. A crow, perched on a rusted windowsill, stared at her without blinking. Natalie pushed forward anyway. She entered through a side door, the hinges crying in protest. Inside, silence, stale, heavy air. She moved through the hallway until she found a room with a faded placard, director's office. Inside were boxes. She opened the first. Photos, dozens of babies, none labeled. One folder, however, was marked with a name, MC number 7. Malik Cross? Inside were developmental charts, notes, psychological evaluations from when he was barely 4. Displays high adaptive potential in social isolation. Resists bonding after basic needs are met. Recommended for longitudinal observation under program Variant 7C. Natalie's knees gave out. She sat on the cold floor, hands trembling. He had been watched, cataloged, not raised, measured, back at the center. Malik received a manila envelope slipped under his cell door. Inside were only 2 things. A photograph of a newborn baby with his hospital tag, Malik Cross. A sticky note. She lied. Again. You were never supposed to know. He sat on his bunk, staring at the note, his chest tight. The handwriting matched none of Natalie's letters, but someone knew how to reach him, someone inside. That night, Natalie called Malik. The juvenile center approved the call at her request. Her voice came through, static-laced, but steady. "Malik?" He didn't respond immediately. "I found a facility. Records about you. They tracked you." "Tracked me?" "Your behaviors since you were a toddler. They made reports, psychological notes. It wasn't an orphanage, Malik. It was a lab." Silence. Then he asked, voice quiet, "How much of that did you know before now?" Natalie's breath caught. "None. I swear it." "Then why didn't you come back for me sooner, after that visit you mentioned?" "I was told the files were sealed, that asking more questions could cost me my job." "Did you choose your job over me?" The line went silent. "I chose survival," she whispered. "I didn't think I had the power to do anything. I thought maybe it would only make it worse." "You were wrong." "I know." Another long pause. He didn't hang up. 2 days later, a knock at Keen's door. He opened it to find a small cardboard box with no return address. Inside, another envelope of photos. Natalie, Malik, courtroom sketches, maps, and a Polaroid of Natalie leaving the old hospice building with a red X marked across her face. At the bottom was a note in the same blocky type as before. "This ends now, or next time we don't miss." Keen dropped the box. They're watching us in real time. In a private meeting room, Natalie met secretly with an old contact from the Attorney General's office, a woman named Vera Chang. Steely, brilliant, uncompromising. "This is a federal scandal waiting to happen," Vera said after reviewing the files. "But it'll be a bloodbath. If you testify, you could lose your license. Your firm will disown you. And if these people have buried 20 years of records, they won't hesitate to bury you." "I'm not backing down," Natalie said. You might not get another chance to say that. Natalie reached into her bag and pulled out one final photo. The newborn Malik, the hospital tag barely visible. Someone has to fight for him. The twist ending, one final reveal. Back at the juvenile center, Malik was pulled from his room. A new visitor had arrived. She was tall, elegant, with soft gray curls and a red scarf. She looked nothing like Natalie, nothing like him, but she smiled warmly and said, "Hello, Malik. I've been trying to reach you for a very long time." He frowned. "Who are you?" She handed him a card. Evelyn Herrick, private legal advocate, estate of Dr. Alwyn Herrick. Malik's face darkened. "You're his daughter?" She nodded slowly. "And I'm here because I think you might be his last mistake. Sometimes the people we're told to trust are the very ones who rewrite our truth, silently, thoroughly, and without permission. Malik wasn't just searching for his mother. He was unearthing a system designed to keep him from ever knowing her. And Natalie? She wasn't just defending a boy in court. She was standing trial against her own past, her silence, her shame, and the buried lies someone swore she'd never uncover. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes it comes back wearing your face. Sometimes it points at you in a courtroom full of strangers and calls you Mom. If this story stirred something in you, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. We've got more stories just like this. True, raw, and unforgettable. And remember, we don't just tell stories. We invite you to feel them. There's a quiz waiting at the end of every video. A little challenge for the sharpest minds. Catch the subtle details and we might just pin your answer. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep listening between the lines. Quiz: which facility did Natalie visit for sealed records?